This is Breakthrough News, and you are watching The Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear. My intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek, is out this week, so sorry to all of you out there in viewer land. You'll just have to suffer on for the rest of the show with only me helming it. But I can promise you, as always, we have a fantastic show with a great slate of fantastic guests that I think you will enjoy quite a bit. So, as always, welcome to you, and I will remind everyone watching on YouTube, now would be a great time to go ahead and hit subscribe, and then to make sure you get the alerts, you want to also make sure you have notifications on when you hit subscribe. It's a little down arrow that you should be able to select. This is what I'm told, at least, so if it's not, don't blame me. But when you hit subscribe, there's a little down arrow that should let you manage your notifications. The old bell that they used to have up there, it's managed a little bit differently. Make sure you turn on all notifications, or at least notifications for this channel, to make sure that you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to, because we have tons of fantastic things coming out in the future, as we always do on Breakthrough News, not just things coming from this show, but many, many other great pieces, like, by the way, the recent documentary that Rania Khalek was able to produce about the impact of the pager attacks in Lebanon, where Israeli actions wounded and killed so many non-combatants, and we were able to get some of the stories of the wounded and put some broader context into that story in, I think, a very important way. So that's exactly the type of thing you would be alerted about and wouldn't even have to go looking for if you hit subscribe, turned on your notifications, you would be ready to go. So again, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn your notifications on. Down arrow, notifications on. And of course, if you're watching on Free Speech TV, you don't need to do anything else. Just keep watching and keep supporting FSTV. And big shout out to the FSTV team, as always, for making it possible to appear on that platform. And since Rania is out, I will also try to step into her shoes as best I can and remind you that one of the most important things to keep us going and growing, somebody like tag Rania on social media and let her know I said going and growing, is to become a member of Breakthrough News. See, I got so excited that I used her phrase, I forgot what I was saying. Is to become a member of Breakthrough News and to financially support us. Of course, no amount is too small or too large. You can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. And you can get all sorts of great things, exclusive content and merch like this mug that I have here, fantastic mug. And also, of course, you will get the satisfaction of having made a very important contribution to a project that I think, that's why you're here watching, is very important to all of us to break through the huge amount of lies and spin coming from the mainstream media on critically important issues that if we are not informed about, we cannot act on. So please, patreon.com/breakthrough news. And as always, big shout out to all of our existing patrons for everything you've done so far. It's made all the difference in the world for us to be able to keep going and keep growing, as it were. So we're about to get started here. We have a lot in front of us, so please subscribe, turn your notifications on, patreon.com/breakthrough news. Let other people know that we are here and share the show and the stream. We're going to start here with a critically important issue on the African continent, and that is the last colony left on the African continent, and that is Western Sahara, currently occupied by the nation of Morocco. Quite a bit happening there in the diplomatic front, as it were, and we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Mahjoub Malia, who is the head of the External Relations Committee of CODESA, which is a collective of Sahrawi human rights defenders in the Western Sahara. Mahjoub, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Eugene. It's always a pleasure to be with you in this show.
Well, it's really a pleasure to have you. And, there's a lot happening. I mean, of course, for many of us who follow the African continent, the surprising, or maybe not surprising, trip by Jacob Zuma to Morocco. Now we've had the country of Portugal following closely behind, both of them saying they support the so-called Autonomy plan for Western Sahara that Morocco has been shopping around the world diplomatically. And I guess I just want to start there. The way this is being presented by Morocco is they are not colonizing Western Sahara, and that this is their new plan to abide by the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. Can you talk about this plan and whether or not it is anything different from the past several decades of colonial occupation that we have seen in Western Sahara?
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you. It's a very good question. And unfortunately, I cannot tell you much about the autonomy plan because no one knows about it. including the Moroccan themselves, except few pages that were presented back in 2007 to the United Nations and Security Council as a proposal to be among the options for the self-determination. But Morocco never disclosed any details of that plan, how it will be implemented, what kind of rulings will be there, the distinguishing the powers. There is nothing basically clear, nor to the international community and nor to the Sahrawi people in Western Sahara. Um, so that autonomy plan doesn't really exist. And in my personal opinion, I think the Moroccan constitution doesn't really allow such a plan to be implemented in Western Sahara, being an authoritarian regime with a centralized power in the palace of the king. So that is a start point where you cannot have an autonomy plan without having a democracy. Let's say that we, the Sahrawis, agree on that, but there is no basis for that plan to be implemented. However, any proposal, any plan, we have also heard Stefan de Mistura, who is the personal envoy of the United Nations Secretary General to the Western Sahara, proposing a separation plan of the territory, and labeling that as thinking outside the box. So what we say is, you think in the box, outside the box, any plan cannot be implemented in Western Sahara without fulfilling or complying with the international law and guaranteeing the fundamental right of self-determination of the Sahrawi people. At the end, it is the Sahrawi people who should agree or disagree on any proposal, any plan to take place in Western Sahara. If you allow me, Eugene, to
Please.
comment on on the recent developments and the marketing campaign that Morocco is taking in relation to advertising its autonomy plan. Recently, the Jacob Zuma from South Africa, from Okomuntu Wisizwe party, the MK, or the Nation's Arrow party. Um, that is, first of all, to start with, it is in contradiction with the consensus that is in South Africa, whether on among the people of South Africa and the political parties in South Africa, who all support the self-determination of the Sahrawi people and the decolonization process in Western Sahara, and support the freedom of all occupied territories among the world, including Palestine, of course. So this contradiction came by Jacob Zuma, and this is, it seems, that a hobby of the Moroccan authorities in the recent years is to gain international or outside support to their so-called autonomy plan in Western Sahara. However, what I can say there, Eugene, is no one has the ownership over Western Sahara except the Sahrawi people. It is the Sahrawi people who can give it or take it back from the occupation. And it doesn't really make any difference on the international level, as we have seen proclamation from President Trump in his first term in the US presidency, and we have seen also proclamations from Sanchez of Spain, Macron of France. But does it really have an impact on the legal ground or legal basis of the question of Western Sahara? The answer is it doesn't. It doesn't have any impact because Morocco is a hostile occupying power in Western Sahara, and it will remain as such unless the Sahrawi people are allowed to exercise their fundamental right to self-determination and choose their political future.
I really appreciate that framing and those points. And one of the things I guess maybe we should also say for people who don't know as much about the issue is, this is Morocco having taken over a long-held colonial claim of Spain and others. And I think sometimes people feel like, oh, Morocco, they don't think about it like a European country, and so it might not, they seem like, oh, how is this a colony? How are they colonizing? So if you could give us some of that history and that background about the long history of colonization in Western Sahara and the connection between this historic colonization and Morocco's ongoing claims.
Yeah, well, the history of Western Sahara's question goes back to the Cold War era, where Morocco sided with the US and other allies in the Western world, let's say. And Western Sahara used to be a Spanish colony. Spain decided to withdraw from the territory without fulfilling its international obligations toward the territory of Western Sahara, which means without properly decolonizing the territory. So they decided back in 1975 to withdraw from the territory and signing a treaty called the Madrid Treaty between Morocco and Mauritania and Spain, dividing the territory among the two neighboring countries, Mauritania and Morocco. So after that, Morocco invaded the territory, or during that, Morocco invaded the territory and tried to annex the territory by force to its national territory. The Sahrawi people has established a national liberation movement, which is known as the Polisario Front, the Front for Liberating the Saga Hamra and Rio de Oro, which are the two main rivers from the north to the south of the territory of Western Sahara. So the Polisario Front picked up the arms to liberate the territory from the Spanish colony back in 73, exactly 10 May 1973. And during that struggle and resistance against the Spanish colony, the territory was handed over to two neighboring countries. Morocco, of course, extended its military operations on the territory, and Polisario Front has been obliged and forced to pick up the arms against the two neighboring countries, Morocco and Mauritania. In 1979, Mauritania decided finally to rectify its mistakes and recognize the Sahrawi Republic and withdraw its claims from the Western Sahara. In contrary, Morocco decided to continue the annexation strategy and policy to annex the additional territories of Western Sahara. So from that time up to 1991, there was a war between the Moroccan military army or Moroccan occupation army and the Polisario Front, who are the indigenous representatives and the sole and legitimate representative of the Sahrawi people. The UN came in 1991 to broker a ceasefire and a deal between Morocco and the Polisario Front with the promise to organize a referendum that will allow the Sahrawi people to exercise their fundamental right of self-determination and choose whether to be or not part of Morocco or to be an independent state. So since 1991, there was a mission of the United Nations created by a Security Council resolution called MINURSO. And the MINURSO is an abbreviation of the Mission of the United Nations for Organization of the Referendum in Western Sahara. Up to today, for over 33, 34 years, we are still waiting for that referendum to take place, which was always blocked by the Moroccan occupation forces. So recently in 2020, Morocco instead decided to create a breach in the territory, in the borders between the Western Sahara and Mauritania, where in a breach of the ceasefire agreement and its protocols. So where that's forced the Polisario to declare the ceasefire agreement to be nullified and back to the armed struggles. So since then, there is clashes between the Moroccan occupation army and the Polisario Front across the separation wall. The separation wall is a wall that is built by the Moroccan occupation forces, 2,700 kilometers long, equipped with anti-personnel, anti-vehicles landmines. So that leaves the Sahara people separated into two parties: the part that lives in the occupied territories under suppression, oppression, violence, human rights violations, imprisonment, forced allegiance, and so on, of the consequences of occupation, and the other half that lives in the refugee camps in South Algeria of Tindouf in a harsh environment, depending on humanitarian aid. So the whole story basically dates back to over 50 years back. So half a century that Morocco is occupying the territory of Western Sahara, forcing its people to be separated and implementing expansion, settlement strategies, forced allegiance, and so on of the occupation policies. It is the time that the world has to put an end to the longest standing occupation in Africa. And it is indeed, as you said during the introduction of Eugene, it is the last colony of Africa that still awaits justice and still awaits a resolution by the international community. However, from our part, as human rights defenders and on behalf of CODESA, we see that is a reflection of the failure of the international community. And that continues to give us more and more doubts about the international order as it is right now, especially after what we have seen in Gaza: crimes against humanity, starvation. Every single rule of the international law has been violated in Gaza against the Palestinian people, and we don't see any of the international community blink for that. And that really raised major concern to us. How far and how long can we still believe the international law, and how far and how long can we still believe in the peaceful struggle? And that is maybe an alarm to be given to the international community to take actions to put end to injustice everywhere in the world, in Western Sahara, in Palestine, and everywhere else in the world.
You know, briefly in this last couple minutes here we have, I also want to note, I mean, you know, when we're talking about colonies, everyone knows that money is being made. And so thinking about what Morocco is getting out of this, can you talk about the exploitation that's happening in the occupied territories of both resources and human resources?
Yeah, definitely. Every occupation is driven by financial or economical interest, and Morocco has major interest in the natural resources in Western Sahara, which is a very rich country when it comes to natural resources, whether it is renewable energies, for solar and wind energies, or non-renewable energies such as phosphate, fish stocks, uranium, gold, and so on. We can keep going counting the riches in Western Sahara. So Morocco is illegally exploiting the natural resources in Western Sahara, and not only that, by using it as a tool to sustain its military occupation by different means, by basically financing its military occupation and military presence in Western Sahara, but also to involve international actor and what we call internationalization of the occupation, involving multinational companies to invest and be tied to the Moroccan propaganda, as well as gaining support, as we have seen from from Jacob Zuma or any other leader who may come up and speak in favor of the so-called autonomy plan. So, and this happening in contradiction with international law. And we have seen recently the Court of Justice of the European Union issuing rulings stating clearly that Morocco has no sovereignty over Western Sahara, that the natural resources of Western Sahara cannot be dealt with through Morocco, and that any economic activities that to take place in the occupied Western Sahara has to have the consent of the Sahrawi people or its representative, which is in this case the Polisario Front. And we see the EU still engaging in exploiting the natural resource of Western Sahara. So that brings us back to the question of how the international law is implemented or respected by those who claim to create it and defend it. So briefly, Eugene, the natural resources, of course, is also used to to manage the demographic engineering and demographic transfer in Western Sahara by bringing thousands and thousands of settlers, of Moroccan settlers, into the territory to make them Sahrawis as a minority, which they are right now, and of course to bribe international actors. I won't be surprised that Zuma or any other leader that is stating such a statement that has a deal behind the scene to make such a statement. However, on the other hand, not only using the natural resources, but also what we have seen since the so-called Abraham Accord, where Morocco play a key role, that Morocco is used now as a platform to settle the scores with countries who oppose the Israelis' occupation in Western Sahara, and it's not a surprise to see Zuma in a in a form of score settling with South Africa after the International Court of Justice case against Netanyahu.
Majroub Malia of Codesa, thank you so much as always for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you all for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Critically important issue. Hopefully everyone follows. Codesa is doing very important work on many fronts as it concerns Western Sahara, but of course lifting up the voices of those who are being imprisoned and tortured on a regular basis, unfortunately due to their advocacy in the occupied territories. We want to turn to another set of occupied territories in another very difficult circumstance that's making news around the world, and that is the ongoing violence being directed towards Palestinian people, ethnic cleansing, apartheid in the West Bank of Palestine, occupied Palestine. And we are very, very happy to be joined here on the show once again by Alice Cassia, who is a Palestinian Christian activist from Beit Jala in the occupied West Bank. Alice, thank you so much for being back with us.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Well, it's really an honor to have you here. Obviously, unfortunately, this morning, 2 teenagers found dead in the West Bank, killed by the Israelis. I believe just over 200, maybe 204 children have been killed since October 7th in the West Bank. I mean, it seems that, obviously what's happening in Gaza is unspeakable, but it does feel that in the West Bank as well, the level of escalation and violence is extreme and, ongoing and continuing. And I was hoping you could just say something about what the current situation is there and the challenges being faced by Palestinian people.
Since 7th of October, they have been taking advantage of the media that are focusing on the war and on what's happening inside Israel and Gaza. And they started to annex more and more of the West Bank. It's almost like whenever you go in West Bank, you have settlements. So rather than also the settlers' violence, the kids that they are using for their own benefits, for their own good. So it's not only land theft, it's also child abuse what they are doing. So if you look at this subject, it has multiple dimensions, which has land theft, settlers' violence, child abuse, ethnic cleansing, and lots of things that are violating the international and human law. So in the West Bank, it's really terrifying. It's horrible. The settlers are getting more and more dangerous. They are backed up by the military and the police. For me, as Alice, I have been attacked by settlers, and they kicked me out of my land and my home, along with my family. And they were backed by the police also and the army, though we have all the documents that needed, and still they are doing what they want. But thank God, in 4 months we have succeeded to get them out. We kicked them out of the land, and we're still proceeding our legal process. But what's happening around, We are not the only family that are facing demolitions and eviction orders, but lots of families that are helpless. We didn't see them yet. It's ethnic cleansing, and it has to be stopped.
It looks in this context here, and the Knesset voted yesterday, rather, 71-13 for a full annexation of the West Bank, and obviously they're moving towards that in a general sense here. But you made the point that they're sort of taking advantage of what's happening in Gaza to accelerate in the West Bank. I mean, it does feel like in this context, the possibility for sort of the total abrogation of any rights for Palestinians in the West Bank is very much on the table. And I mean, what would be the consequences, or what does this mean, I think, for the future of the Palestinian cause here, that this sort of open annexation seems to be a bigger part of the discourse in Israel?
Let's be open, and in my opinion, they will never do it. It's all propaganda. It's all just their tactics. Their way is to spread rumors, to spread fear. So what makes people leave is the fear. And if they succeeded with putting fear in people's heart, they will leave. But Palestinians are really strong. Since many years, they have been trying to make us leave, and we stayed in our land, and it will never happen. Let them vote till more 10 years in Knesset. They will never succeed taking the West Bank. And I think what's happening now in the West Bank, because they know that they are leaving soon, there will be two-state solutions, and they are trying to take as much as possible lands. They are trying to evacuate as much as people as possible. But in my opinion, my personal opinion, they will never succeed. Palestinians will never leave. They will stay. But what they did in the West Bank, they have blocked all of the cities. Like each city has an electric gate. So whenever they want to close it, they can close it in just a second. It's like ghettos. So they are trying to separate each city and people from each others. But I believe soon everything will be better than before, because we have hope. And as Christian from Bethlehem that have faced demolitions and faced eviction and settlers harassment and all of this, I have faith in Jesus, and I believe that justice will prevail. And I want to tell everyone that this is not a religious war. It's a profit war. Whatever they are trying to take from Palestinian lands, it's all for projects. It's all for money. The politics is just a propaganda. But all people that are trying to take Palestinian lands, they are working for projects that brings them millions and millions of dollars, and it's not about religion. They don't care about Jews, they don't care about Christians, they don't care about Muslims, and they don't care about anyone. All what they care is about money, and this is the problem. So when people understand that those settlers are not moving alone, there are big organizations, settlers organizations are funding this, they will understand that the head of the snake are not the settlers, the kids. It's the big organizations that we have to fight, and we have to stop this. Like Americans and people around the world should stop funding those settlers organizations, because also Christians, Muslims, and Jews are suffering from this.
I'm glad you mentioned at the beginning of the interview that the police are backed up by the military, because in the U.S. media, because of some of the recent settler attacks against the military, they're sort of portraying it as if, the police and the settlers are on one side and the military is actually there kind of in the middle protecting people, on both sides. And I was hoping you could talk about that, because I think that's it's all like if Ben Gvir wasn't there, everything would be fine. And the IDF is some sort of protector or something like that of Palestinians in the West Bank.
I want to mention that I'm a Palestinian with an Israeli citizenship. I'm also French. So what happened just proved to me that no matter who you are in this country, if you're not typical Jew, Israeli Jew, you're still a second class citizen. So they don't care, like the IDF, they don't really care. They have orders, and those orders come from Smutrich and Ben Gvir, who are funding this also. So the police, for example, in the West Bank, I have faced so much racism because I have defended my land and I have been attacked by settler and they arrested me many times and they don't really care if you have an Israeli citizenship or Palestinian or whatever. Whatever orders they have for their own projects, they will keep going with it. And the police and the army have orders to follow this. They maybe the IDF, some of them, they have orders. They don't know what's happening. They're just following the orders. But all of it is funded by those settlers organizations that have been forging documents. There are land deals exchanged in the West Bank. It's like people around the world, they don't really what's happening inside the West Bank. People, when Palestinians want to defend their lands, they cannot go to Israeli courts. And they hire lawyers, and those lawyers could be bribed, could be threatened, could be manipulated. And this is how people are losing their lands. And also it's tactics when they send settlers to harass people. When they, for example, what happened with me also is that they convinced my neighbors to get their documents done, so they have to sign a new map where they erase our name and put Himenota, which is the Jewish National Fund daughter company, instead. And because of their fear, my neighbors, they are Palestinian, because of their fear of losing their land, they did so. It's like, it's not only, it's a tactic since many years. There are lots of plans that they follow, sending settlers, convincing our neighbors, spreading rumors that people sold the land, which is not true. But all of it, it's about forging documents. It's about people are being manipulated with rumors, so they leave, they immigrate, they just get tired. We have been in this story since more than 15 years. And we're still struggling, and we will never leave the land. We're still fighting them. And I hope lots of people stay in their lands, because there will come one day where justice will prevail. And I want to say something, that those settlers, the kids, they are being used, and they should wake up that their own organizations, their own government are using them. And it's not about promised land. It's about project land, a profit land. This is what they care.
You know, one of the things that I love to hear your response about, I mean, recently, of course, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, made some statements, as did U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. They're under pressure, of course, from Christians here in the United States to speak out against attacks on churches and the Christian community. But they, of course, have been, you know, outspoken in their support of Israel for many, many decades. I wonder how in Christian communities there in the West Bank, those statements landed. I mean, was it welcome? Does it feel hollow? And what should the U.S. government really be doing if it wants to protect people in the West Bank?
I think people are tired of statements. We are tired of talking. We need actions. And the statements, they do nothing. And what I think is that it's the right time that our Christian institutions to speak out, to act. It's enough, because I know also our Christian institutions are under threat. They are not free to do whatever they want. So when we wake up, the majority of Western Christians, of what's really happening what's really happening in the cradle of Jesus Christ in Bethlehem and in the West Bank, and they should know that Jesus, he was born in Bethlehem. and they are still supporting the Israeli government or the Israeli actions in a way of defending them, that they are the promised people, the promised land, or whatever. They should wake up about what's really happening to the indigenous Christians in Bethlehem or in the Holy Land and in Taipei or anywhere else, because the Christian community is getting really smaller. We are less than 2%. And I believe that Christians are more dangerous for the Israeli government, because Christians have another way of thinking, another way of reacting, and it's easier for them to give them more permissions to travel or make it easier for them to travel. So when they annex the West Bank, they will take advantage of it and say, oh, because of Muslims, we'll take off this land or blah, 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 because there will be no Christians to protect those lands anymore. It's the responsibility for all Christians around the world to wake up, to act, and for the Christian institutions around the world to stop, releasing statements, or politicians releasing statements, and act, because it's enough. We are tired. We are really tired.
Well, Alice, we really appreciate you being willing to join us, and we appreciate everything you have going on. Before we let you go, I know that you're also pushing forward with your legal fight, and there is a way I think people can support you. So I wanted to just ask about that briefly before we let you go.
Thank you a lot. Of course, they can visit my Instagram, Alice Kisia, or Save El Mafrour, and there's the GoFund link, because also the settlers, they have accused me and my mom of running over a soldier, which is not true. And they arrested me for that before 7 months, and the civil court has released me. But they in a way, they want to push me more to concentrate on another thing than the land. So they opened a lawsuit against me and my mom to put me in prison again. So it's very helpful that people would support through the GoFund link. And I really appreciate the time that you gave me, and you gave me an opportunity to speak on your stage. Thank you a lot.
Absolutely. No, it was an honor. Thank you so much.
My honor.
Well, yeah, I mean, what else can you really say? As I said, if you're just tuning in, 2 Palestinian teenagers killed by the Israelis recently there in the West Bank. 204 children have been killed there since October 7th by Israeli forces. We want to move on to another very important story, and that is, well, it's a number of kind of interlocking stories there. Political corruption, cryptocurrency, and the intersection, perhaps, of those two things. And we are super, super honored to be joined here on the show by Jacob Silverman, who's been writing a lot of great pieces about crypto and political corruption, and also is the author of the forthcoming book, Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. I'm definitely going to be reading that. Jacob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, really great to have you, and there's so much to dig into here on a number of different fronts. And I think where I want to start, and the whole sort of piece about cryptocurrency and a lot of what's happening with the deregulation around it, is I think the way a lot of people look at, like, quote unquote regulation is that, it's good to regulate things that are bad, and, things that are fine, we should deregulate them. But I think crypto is in this sort of space where a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's this great new store of value. It's like buying gold or something like that, or whatever it may be. So I wanted to kind of start there. Like, is cryptocurrency and the sort of rise of cryptocurrency something people should actually be concerned about in terms of our need to look at it more deeply and regulate it?
Yeah, and I would say that's something we've learned from experience over the last decade or more. I mean, I wrote about a previous crypto crash in 2022 when FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried's company fell apart, and there were other multi-billion-dollar frauds. And a lot of regular people lost money because they were sort of taught to believe in the speculative market through a lot of celebrity ads and powerful people saying that crypto was the future. And ultimately, when the bottom fell out of this market, because a lot of it was fraudulent, it hurt regular consumers. And I thought we'd have a longer time before reinflating that bubble and a lot of it coming back again. But of course, It happened very quickly, as things tend to in crypto. The bubble reinflated. You had the cryptocurrency industry completely aligning with the Republican Party and putting forth more than $200 million to re-elect Donald Trump in 2024. So, this is not just kind of some speculative gambling market. I would actually argue that crypto in many ways is more of a predatory financial scheme, like payday loans. That's how I think we have to think of it. And now it's underwriting probably the biggest act of financial corruption in presidential history in the case of Trump's many crypto interests. So to me, it's a bigger deal than ever in that its malign effects, its potential for harm is greater than ever. At the same time, I think a lot of everyday people, fortunately, aren't as interested in crypto anymore. It's actually powerful actors in business and government, I think, who are pushing crypto on the rest of us now.
Well, that's a great point, because it does lead us, as you said, to President Donald Trump. I mean, he seems to be right at the center of certainly the deregulatory policies, but also making quite a bit of money. I mean, I almost don't even know how to talk about it, because honestly, having read some of your pieces, I thought I knew, and it's actually deeper than I thought it was. I mean, Trump stands to make a huge amount of money from the policies he's putting in place, and it seems like he's pretty openly opening the door and saying, hey, if you want an intro into my office, this is the way.
Yeah, Trump has several different vehicles basically for earning money through crypto. World Liberty Financial, which was co-founded by Trump's sons, Steve Wickoff, Steve Wickoff's sons. Trump had a title there, is probably the most important. That's the one that issues this World Liberty Financial token, also this USD1 stablecoin. Then you have the meme coins, which is through another venture with another friend of Trump's. But the basic point is that he has his hand in many pots. And anyone who wants to enrich Trump, whether he asks for it or not, can just buy some of these tokens or send money to or send crypto to one of his crypto companies' wallets. And I imagine this is happening, and we know this is happening already with people making 8-figure, 9-figure deals with Trump. But I imagine this is happening on an even greater stage. If you are a foreign leader pretty much anywhere in the world, it is in your direct interest to put some money in Trump's pocket. I mean, this isn't even a moral issue that we're talking about here from a kind of realpolitik perspective. This is also the language that Trump speaks and is familiar with. So there's obviously no mechanisms really for enforcement anymore, or anyone around to enforce the law, or we're way past worrying about the emoluments clause and people and foreign countries renting rooms at Trump Hotel. The potential here is huge, like billions and billions of dollars in illicit funds.
And by sort of maybe loosening the reins is even downplaying it around the cryptocurrency industry. I mean, it creates so many ripple effects on multiple different fronts. I mean, he's also dismantling the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which people could report some of these companies to. But it feels like, by essentially eliminating the regulations, anyone involved in crypto in any way, shape, or form exposed to it is at a much greater risk. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the sort of scale of the deregulatory efforts that they're putting forward here.
Sure. So from day one, Trump has been basically eliminating the rule of law, especially as it relates to financial crimes, high-level corporate crimes. He famously pardoned all the January 6th rioters, but he also pardoned a lot of financial criminals and people who admitted to and confessed to huge acts of fraud. And a number of them were in crypto or in kind of finance or crypto adjacent industries. So from the beginning, I would argue there was sort of a message put out that these kinds of crimes weren't going to be enforced anymore. And then you had the SEC drop some major cases, including after some people put a lot of money into Trump's crypto companies. The DOJ, which enforces the criminal side of things, decide to stop investigating or stop prosecuting some important crypto-related cases. So everywhere you look, the mechanisms of enforcement, whether civil or regulatory or criminal, were being dismantled very consciously, I think, and very much in line with the crypto industry's goals. This isn't, I mean, perhaps there are some knock-on effects for Wall Street, but this is something that really came from the crypto industry and the people around Trump, the venture capitalists and other people involved in the crypto industry, including his sons. And so I would argue that this was a very conscious effort, and it was also one that would, from the beginning, clearly benefit Trump, who was knee-deep in the crypto industry before he even took office.
And I know, Elon Musk, of course, is a big promoter of meme coins. And I mean, what's the maybe relationship here between sort of the crypto industry, the sort of broader drift we see in Silicon Valley? And I know you got the upcoming book, Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. Like this, what we've seen with this sort of right-wing tech move that is now influencing our country in such significant ways.
Well, I think crypto has always been broadly right-wing coded in one way or another, but it was more of a libertarian cypherpunk, like against the state sort of thing, like leave me alone to live my life with my encrypted digital currency. There's been a shift in recent years, and I think I saw it especially at the annual Big Bitcoin conference this year in Vegas, where J.D. Vance gave a speech. There are a number of senators and members of Congress, all of them Republican, who appeared, and other appointed officials like David Sachs and Bo Hines. And it was really like this convergence of MAGA and crypto. And what the Republican Party has been able to do by very explicitly aligning itself with crypto has been sort of to take that traditional Republican fake populist anti-government sentiment and make crypto part of that. Somehow buying Bitcoin or even buying Trump coin is like putting up a middle finger to the government. I wouldn't claim that this is a coherent philosophy necessarily or make a lot of sense, but that's where they've channeled, I think, a lot of that instinct, and also by providing all these opportunities for their fans to buy crypto. Whereas a few years ago they might have been selling them timeshares or MLMs or supplements. Now they're encouraging them to get into crypto or various branded crypto products related to their political campaigns or their goals. So that's where you've seen this real convergence of kind of MAGA culture, crypto as a business, and also crypto putting a tremendous amount of money towards its policy goals. And one thing I think is also worth noting is, when this inevitably goes bust, as it generally does, because there aren't great underlying fundamentals here, it's going to be the regular people who decide to buy in, like those everyday MAGA people who, unfortunately believe in this stuff or have bought a lot of Trump meme coins. And when that crashes, or when Trump and his friends cash out on the backs of MAGA speculators, it's going to be a lot of everyday people who suffer, as they do in every kind of MLM or scam like this.
No, it's a great point. And finally, I'll just ask you, I mean, and this is, as you said, like not a hypothetical of the things that have gone bust before. And there's a long record here of financial malfeasance tied to crypto.
That's right. And, we were kind of lucky in 2022 in that when FTX and a bunch of other crypto exchanges went down and you had this great decline in prices. I mean, there were a lot of everyday people hurt, but there wasn't contagion where it spilled over into mainstream finance. One of the other things Trump is doing is he's making it a lot easier for crypto to access mainstream money on Wall Street. Just the other day, he signed an executive order to allow 401ks to more easily invest in crypto. So there are a lot of ways in which, even if you're not interested in crypto, you still might have financial exposure to it through your retirement account, a fund manager, maybe your employer is going to put it on their balance sheet. Like, there are a lot of ways in which we're going to have to play by crypto's rules and be exposed to their risk. And I think that's a real problem for a lot of us, and it's one we're going to have to contend with very soon.
Mm-hmm. Jacob Silverman, author of the forthcoming book, Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is an amazing issue, and I hope folks are, checking out Jacob's byline. He had a recent article in The Nation. We had one in the June 2025 issue of American Prospect, which I highly suggest people read, and he mentioned it here in the interview just now, but that Steve Wickoff and his son are deeply involved in World Liberty Financial, and at least according to Business Insider, as Jacob relates, Wickoff, apparently when you see him going around the world and doing all these various different shuttle diplomacy things, is telling world leaders, well, if you want more influence with Trump, like, invest in these various crypto products that World Liberty Financial is involved in, where of course Trump is getting paid, but he and his son are also getting paid. And then you wonder, okay, hey, why has Wickoff now become the guy who's going to like every country in the world negotiating for Trump? They say he's the world's greatest negotiator. He's so great. He's doing this. He's doing that. But is that what is really happening here? Or is this negotiation also going in a mercantilist type way and them cutting deals on the side in different ways with different countries? I mean, it really is amazing and sort of shocking in some ways. And the pump and dump aspect of this is huge. Like the cryptocurrency reserve, Trump says, we're going to buy these 3 coins. And of course, then everyone wants to rush into those coins because the U.S. is going to buy a bunch of them, right? So everyone who owns them now can offload them for significantly larger amounts of money. So every time that Trump is posting on True Social or whatever and mentioning any of these things, anybody can see, okay, well, obviously this means that this is going to go up, whatever it may be. And then they, are able to sell their holdings in different ways that they're able to benefit on the upswing of Trump and others promoting it. So it really is just an insane level of corruption. And just to remind people too, the element of this is, since the Supreme Court has already ruled in favor of Trump on the issue of essentially the president being able to do whatever he wants while he's in office, it more or less insulates him from any form of criminality and corruption in terms of people using these various coins. And so you can remember in the first Trump administration, everyone was like super upset, and rightfully so, about the hotel in DC, and you could see, like, not only of course was it like pro-Trump organizations, but like I think some Gulf state governments or whatever, are like buying it out for conferences or something like that, and it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to figure out what they're doing there. But now it's actually that times like 1 million, because you can put sort of unlimited money into these meme coins. And again, I would just direct people to Jacob's article from the American Prospect, June 2025, where he opens about a guy who spent $20 million and openly wrote to his investors that, like, yeah, we think this is going to improve our ability to lobby the administration because we bought $20 million of this Trump meme coin. So the level of corruption is, there's obviously a lot of corruption in the history of U.S. politics, so unprecedented, who knows, but certainly unprecedented in the modern era that this kind of brazen corruption would be taking place. People try to hide it a little bit more in this era, but no more. So anyway, shout out to Jacob for being willing to come on. Definitely check out his book, Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley, coming out soon. Well, now we want to turn to another critically important issue, and this is one that is flowing from the victory in the Democratic primary of Zohran Mamdani, and that is how we discuss many of the important issues around public safety, around quote-unquote crime, and not only how we sort of frame them, but how that framing then affects the policy choices that we're making, and what that really means about how we're able to build a politics that's broader and more transformative, that can really reach the most affected people in many of these with many of these concerns. So we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Lawrence Prix, who's a director of research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Lawrence, as always, appreciate you joining us.
Appreciate you having me.
Well, great to have you as always. And, a lot of people talking about many things and related to Zohran Mamdani, and of course the ripple effects of his win have been significant. Everyone from Trump on down talking about it constantly. But of course, one of the major issues that's being sort of weaponized against him now by many is, well, if he's elected, mayor, crime is going to shoot through the roof. All the cops are going to leave. Everything's going to be terrible. It's going to be like Judge Dredd in New York City. And so, of course, this is becoming an important issue. And I think it's important on a number of points. Obviously, just that in and of itself makes it topical. But where I want to start this conversation is maybe his response to some of this. And by response, I mean some of what he was proposing ahead of time. He's a smart guy, so he knew people were going to raise this. So he's obviously talking about quote unquote public safety. And I think that term in and of itself says a lot. Like, what is public safety and how do we define it? And that feels to me like an important aspect of this conversation, because different people are interacting with the issue of safety in various different ways. And obviously, I think a lot of what his campaign is talking about is sort of subway crime in particular is the thing that's been zeroed in on with the media and others. But obviously, there's gun violence, there's many other things, robberies, different things like that. So anyway, I wanted you to talk a little bit about that framing of like what we actually mean about public safety and what it may say about who we're talking about when we frame it a certain way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So two things can be true at the same time. Zohran winning the young black vote shows that the rhetoric around black folks being conservative, and specifically being conservative on issues of public safety, the Democratic Party is deeply invested in that narrative because they can convince you you can't vote for a progressive because the old black people are too scared of being mugged, right? And ironically, a lot of older black people vote for moderates because they think conservative white voters are conservative on public safety, right? So there's this interesting thing that's happening there. At the same time, I read all of Zoran's public safety plan, and the first 10 pages are all about subway crime and all about open homelessness, mental illness. And of course, many people will say homelessness and mental illness don't actually lead to public safety threats. That's a progressive talking point. So the fact that he focused so much on that, I think, is politically savvy in some ways because it shows he's listening to what people perceive as crime, but it also leads to some of his potential softness with the black vote, because that's not how we experience crime. We experience, even with crime declines, large amounts of assault that go completely unreported. We see more young people experiencing gun carrying and feel they need to carry a gun for protection, not because they're super predators, but carrying a gun because they need protection in an environment where they know police don't care for them. And the black community has concerns about that Zoran is not only not speaking to, but I feel that some of the things in his public safety plan may actually exacerbate some concerns black folks have about wanting to control public safety in our communities. So I think one of his best points about how you redefine public safety is this movement around alternatives to policing violence prevention, which is mentioned in his public safety plan. I think when I actually looked up his vision for community-based violence prevention, the organization that he wants to fund, one of the people on the board is actually from Baltimore. Her name is Cheryl Goldstein. Cheryl Goldstein is the person who brought the gun trace task force to Baltimore.
Wow.
And she's on the board of the nonprofit Zoran wants to give millions of dollars to do public safety in New York. And when you understand why black people have concerns over leftists, it isn't just because they're conservative on public safety. It's because they understand that materially, the nonprofit industrial complex has a material interest in monopolizing resources that are supposed to go to their community. So I've talked to people in Cheryl Goldstein's network, and they say things like, we don't believe grassroots communities have the solution to the problems. We are the experts. We have the capacity. We think we should get the money to do them. And if that's called social engineering of black communities, then I guess that's what you call it. These are actual conversations we've had with people in those networks. And again, those people view black grassroots organizations, the people who are driving the massive violence declines in Baltimore, in Philly, 50% drops in murder. They view those organizations as material competition. So it's not identity politics that drives black voters to have concerns over leftists. It is people like Zoran not understanding that there are progressive black institutions that he could fund. And the left should dominate this conversation on funding grassroots orgs, but the lack of precision about investing in black grassroots organizations means that people like Zoran, a leftist that have, I believe, over-indexed to completely dismiss identity politics. And that means they're missing the critical opportunity to fund grassroots black-run organizations that specifically use the culture and history of black people to address violence in ways that the progressive, university-connected, public health, nonprofit people just can't. And it's that blinder some leftists have about the actual cultural and spiritual technologies being used by these grassroots organizations to produce these incredible outcomes on public safety. They don't understand that they're actually investing in people who are hostile to that. And that's why the black community goes to the center and the left, the center and the conservatives, because they say, well, I might get a handout or a hookup for some of the orgs in my community because I have connections to those political machines. And the left says, well, that's the corruption. There's black folks doing the, fatback and biscuits politics. But if the alternative is giving millions of dollars to the person who brought the gun trace task force to Baltimore, literally, this is a gang of criminal cops plaguing our community. That just shows you the violence embedded in some of these progressive nonprofit networks that the left has become a little bit too not precise about in terms of understanding how actually to do redistribution in the way that empowers communities. So I know it's a lot, but I just wanted to sort of lay that out there.
No, it's a lot, but it's a lot of really important information, and that's deep about the gun trace task force. Like that, if that ain't a something to cancel you, then I don't know what else is. And I'm glad you brought up the phrase identity politics and sort of the level of precision, because one way I think about this and push back if you think this is wrong is I feel like a lot of times there's a confusion between identity politics and self-determination. Like, and I think people look at identity politics and think like, oh, this is just people, as you say, taking advantage and sort of weaponizing quote unquote racial politics. And so anything that seems in that vein is bad. But it feels like there's this other history of Black politics in America around self-determination and taking control of our own narrative and our own communities that is not identity politics in the way that people mean, although it is a form of identity politics. That's important for us to uplift in this conversation to understand what liberation could even look like or should look like.
Absolutely. And I think that when you understand the Black radical tradition is diverse, you can but again, two things can be true at the same time. That's why I want to start off that way. It is true that identity politics can be used by folks like Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton to claim neoliberal investments in Black communities as an affirmation of recognition of Black people. But there is also a vision of, you could even call it buying local. You could call it local hiring. You can call it the people who are closest to the problem being closest to the solution. Zoran probably says that in his stump speech. But you need to understand, to actually do that, you have to invest in a theory of moving public dollars that centers on elevating those forces when you give out the contract. We have a word for that. That word is affirmative action. But affirmative action has become so tainted with college admissions. Again, the whole controversy over Zoran checking African American on his application, it's been so tainted by the left that one thing that I constantly say is that there is a Black elite version of affirmative action that deals with admission to elite universities. There's also forms of affirmative action that have genuinely benefited the Black middle class, and that's come from just using the power of the Black vote to get cities and states to invest in Black institutions when white institutions were not hiring them or not giving them resources, including the unions. Famously, construction unions were extremely racist, and Black folks needed to get working class Black people jobs. And so there was a movement to get minority contracts set aside so that when the government spent money, some of that money had to go to minority contractors. And again, these folks were not unionized. And that's where the left has a problem with it. But the unions were racist, so what could we do? Also, one of the biggest things elders will tell you is that those were working class Black people who not only got benefits to public dollars, what do you call that besides economic redistribution of resources, but also they say it kept a lot of people off the corners in the 70s and 80s. So the Black community views this redistribution question as a question of violence prevention and crime prevention, but you have to be explicit about investing in Black grassroots organizations. And part of the reason why it's such an opportunity for Zoran is that violence prevention is a prime space to center Black grassroots organizations. They have a track record of success. These are people who are often formerly in so-called gangs, become street organizations. And they have cultural methodologies that big mainstream nonprofits can't replicate. We talk all the time about Amos Wilson, taught in New York, taught at CUNY, said that violence is the externalization of a suicidal impulse. In the Black community, the internalized self-hatred and the cultural racism drives people to externalize that into gun violence against people that look like them. And many of the orgs that have been leading these massive crime declines have been using these methodologies, but part of, again, the left is so materialist, they can't imagine that culture can have that power. And they can't understand what it means to actually intentionally say, when you apply for a contract to do violence prevention, I want to see you using the methodologies of the communities most impacted by violence prevention. You could easily say that without talking about race. You could easily say, I'm going to redirect a chunk of the tax revenue from legal cannabis sales into communities most impacted by cannabis arrests to fund these sort of grassroots orgs. I think Zoran is close to saying those things, but if he isn't precise, this is impacted by the corruption conversation. To conclude, when you see Adams and you see his so-called corruption, it's easy to think every Black person that gets a contract, there got to be some sort of homie hookup. They can't actually be the best person for the job. They can't actually be invested in community because everybody says that. And again, the left has so over-indexed for corruption and over-indexed against Black elected officials engaging community to redistribute resources to community that what we're going to get is them investing in these multi-million-dollar nonprofits that have this embedded anti-Blackness and embedded racism, but from a progressive standpoint.
No, it's such a great point. I mean, when I was working on violence interruption in DC, the thing they would always say when they started putting money behind it is, well, people don't have the infrastructure to be able to manage that kind of money. And it's just like, well, there's a lot of hidden things behind that. Like, it's a lot of people, it sounds like, oh no, of course that's right, people don't know that, but it's basically like, yeah, these people from the street can't handle $5 million, they're going to steal it and buy Cadillacs or whatever it's going to be, and forgetting that these are the people doing it for no money oftentimes ahead of time, which is, I think, very important. And so, I mean, let me just ask you that too, on a forward-looking way. I mean, if Zoran or someone from his team is watching this, I mean, what are the things that people really need to start embracing? I mean, you've been speaking to it, but, in a direct way, I want to just speak to that aspect of how to sort of turn this conversation around, because I think the point you're making is, it should be something dominated by progressive people, this conversation, as opposed to being, where it is now.
Yeah, I would say reach out to folks like Erica Ford at Life Camp, and not just because she seems credible. They have something called credible clinicians. And the idea of a credible clinician is you don't need to have a degree to do this healing work. But if you have experience in community in the streets, then that can be a qualifier for you to get access to jobs. What I'm saying is that this is a potential multi-billion-dollar industry. And if you can sell people like Erica Ford and other credible folks in the violence prevention community that this is a way to get thousands of people employed to have these credible clinician experiences that make them actually the most qualified for the job, that's going to prevent those people from being seduced by the center. Well, we just saw the poll that says that Cuomo, if it were head-to-head, is tied with Zoran. He's 1 point ahead in that poll. This is an intentional political strategy to freeze off the center from using that traditional transactional Black politics against you. But you need to be very intentional about saying a part of a bottom-up politics is to resist the top-down technocracy of the nonprofit industrial complex, of the public health industrial complex. And if you aren't explicit about that, then you're actually, again, you're going to be funding institutions that Black people in our community perceive as the enemy, because they are competing with us for resources. And they face things, like you said, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the expertise, even though, again, there is no real explanation for these violence declines that are happening in communities around the country. And ask yourself why you're not hearing more about that. I say you're not hearing more about that because they're driven by a grassroots Black-led social movement around violence prevention. And if there was a Black-led grassroots movement around violence prevention, would you even know it, given our media environment and given the limitations of progressive media to tap in to those Black-led social movement entities? I think that's what's happening. I think that's the opportunity. And I think if Zoran loses, it will be his inability to effectively tap into the energy that can easily be directed away from Cuomo. There is no love for Cuomo or any Democrat in a lot of these Black communities. There's an understanding that certain Democrats are more willing to listen for this investment in grassroots Black formations, and others, be they more conservative or more leftist, oftentimes are not willing to see the value in that. And that's where the loyalty and the votes come in. So it's an opportunity, but it's also a risk. And we want to see the left maximize the opportunity to plug redistribution, economic redistribution, into powering grassroots organizations like this.
Well, Lawrence, before I let you go, where can people find more and support Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle if they so choose?
You can check us out on our website, lbsbaltimore.com. We also have a podcast in the Black Liberation Media YouTube network, In Search of Black Power. We have a lot of work we're doing here in Baltimore on violence prevention, reparations for the war on drugs, undoing Governor West's veto of the reparations bill. And again, to really push that as a conversation to redistribute resources within the state in an effective way, not in a traditional identity politics distraction way. So again, go to lbsbaltimore.com, especially if you sign up for our email listserv. Social media doesn't love these perspectives, but if you get our email listserv, you get all our information brought to you in our monthly newsletter.
Right on. And we'll be having LBS on monthly moving forward. And we really appreciate y'all in general, and you specifically, Lawrence Grand Prix, for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Critically important conversation and work. I really hope people check out what LBS is doing. They're doing great work in Baltimore, state of Maryland, and things that have a lot of resonance all around the country in really important ways, as you can hear just there. We want to turn back to another critically important issue, and that is Palestine and, of course, the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the ripple effects that it's having all around the world. And we are very, very honored to be joined once again by Layan Fuleihan, who is the education director at the People's Forum and an editor at 1804 Books. Layan, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side once again.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Well, I want to start here with some breaking news and what you think of the significance or maybe lack thereof. France has just decided they will recognize the state of Palestine. So that's the first G7 country to officially recognize the state of Palestine. Give me your thoughts on that, Layan.
Well, I can't say I'm totally surprised by this move because Macron has been hinting at it for quite some time. He's been kind of himself out to be the one who's going to step in and intervene in this situation. He's been talking about the two-state solution. He wants to recognize a path forward for a two-state solution. He wants a Palestinian state. I think it's significant historically because France, for those who don't know, France was the original sponsor of the Israeli settler colonial project before the United States saw in it a tactical and strategic objective and then turned all their resources towards becoming that main sponsor. It was France until 1967 that really provided the political cover, the funding, and all the other kinds of support that Israel needed to annex Palestinian land and carry out their program of ethnic cleansing. So the fact that France is now saying they recognize a Palestinian state is in some ways historically significant. The question, though, is what does this mean for the absolutely dire life and death situation that's currently playing out in Gaza and in the West Bank? Is France's recognition of a Palestinian state, in theory, meaning that France is going to do anything, put any political pressure, use any of their means, economic, political, any kind of means that they have to change the situation in which Palestinian people are being shot as they wait in line for minimal amounts of food? Over 100 people have starved to death just in the past few weeks. And that's, again, our numbers are always undercounts. I mean, this is a really dire situation. So nominal recognition of the idea of a Palestinian state, like I said, is historically significant. But is it significant for the life or death situation facing millions of Palestinians right now? That, I think, still has yet to be seen. And I don't think anyone's holding their breath for France to put really their money where their mouth is right now. Of course, if that does happen, that's great. But they have not until now done anything concrete.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've already started talking about it. I mean, the humanitarian crisis, it's been ongoing, but it's growing so acute with the use of hunger as a weapon. We had over 100 aid agencies discussing the issue of food. And the thing I also want to talk about here, Layan, in regards to this, and please just, I think, lay out the scale of what's happening, but the Israelis are saying, well, there's all this food, there's all this aid there, and they're just not giving it out, these aid agencies. So they're just like hypocritically criticizing us, and everything is like basically fine. And it just, obviously it's hard to square that with reality and what you see. But of course, it has a propaganda effect. So, I mean, what is really going on here in terms of the aid that's getting in, how it's being distributed, and how that is relating to the famine-like conditions that people are experiencing?
Well, there's absolutely no verification that there is the 900 and something trucks of aid that Israel claims is there in Gaza. Israel is occupying and has evacuation orders for over 83% of the Gaza territory. That's a very small amount of area where people can actually be. There's sometimes reports of some aid, some trucks being able to get in, but most of the distribution right now, I mean, Israel is blocking the UN and other international relief agencies from distributing any aid or aid from entering in. Let's just remember the scene that we're in. Since March 2nd, Israel has placed a total blockade on all borders of the Gaza territory. You can't go out into the ocean. People are shot for even just being on the coast. There's absolutely no ability for people to move in and out of the borders. Sisi from Egypt said that the border on the Egyptian side is open. He made this clarification just this week. It's on the other side where Israel has closed it. So this is a total blockade, total siege. They are the ones who are in control of what goes in. They are also the ones in control of what gets distributed. Now, there's we've talked about it on the show before. There's an aid mechanism that was cooked up by the United States and Israel called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the one right now that is supposedly distributing aid. Said what they're doing is they're using it as a death trap. They have meager amounts of aid. Some of it, there's reports that have shown that some of it has in it laced opiate drugs and is otherwise contaminated. But anyway, they do have some amounts of aid which they say they are distributing, but the scenes from those distribution sites are horrific. An ex-member of the security for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, it's a horrible acronym because it is certainly not a humanitarian foundation, himself left, a U.S. security employee, someone who's worked in conflict zones where the United States has been involved, who is not someone who is unfamiliar with violence, said this is too violent. Shooting down women, shooting down men, shooting down children who are just waiting for flour. Now, for the everyday Palestinian, for all Palestinians in Gaza, the question is, do I risk my life to go get a bag of flour, or do me and the dozens of people in my family go hungry? This is the question that is facing Palestinians every day. There's videos that you can see of someone returning home with a bag of flour and everyone cheering, because the question of whether or not they would survive their trip to get flour is a real question, and it's very, very likely that you would not survive. So aid in this context has been turned into a death trap. It has been turned into a weapon of war. Now the Palestinian demands are that there is an unfettered entry of aid. Even now, just a few bags of flour is nothing in the conditions of mass starvation that Gaza is facing. It's hard to speak about and to quantify because people don't have access to clean water. People don't have access to medicine. The doctors in the hospitals are operating on people without having eaten themselves. There's babies that are dying from malnutrition. There are adults who are dying from malnutrition. The conditions of starvation are here. It's a man-made condition. It's an Israeli-made condition, Eugene. And the Western media, the Wall Street Journal, I'm trying to look and see if there's any top line headline news about this massacre of people through mass starvation that is happening here in 2025 in front of the world's eyes. And the first headline I could find on the Wall Street Journal was dozens of Palestinians seeking aid killed in northern Gaza as they came under fire while waiting for aid to arrive from Israel. Is an attempt here, and it's a very well-coordinated attempt to mask the fact that Israel and the United States are in cahoots, and they're actually using starvation as a weapon. Just a few hours ago, Wickoff announced that they will be withdrawing the U.S. and Israeli negotiators from the ceasefire negotiating table. The Israelis have returned to Tel Aviv. Basically, the talks have stopped. And why? Because Hamas submitted their response to the ceasefire proposal that was on the table. They said that they wanted amendments that would include more access for UN aid agencies to distribute aid, and that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation would no longer be a distributor of aid, which is obviously would make sense considering that people are being shot and killed when they're going to receive aid from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and also that the Israeli military would withdraw from some of the more densely populated zones. This, the Wickoff and the Israelis claimed, shows that Hamas is not serious about a ceasefire, and they have stopped the negotiations. They also then claim that Hamas is using famine as a negotiating tool, and therefore the talks are illegitimate. Well, Eugene, it's like we're in the twilight zone because the United States and Israel are using famine to coerce Palestinians into accepting a new reality of U.S.-Israeli occupation of Gaza. They have plans to push the 2 million people in Gaza to the southernmost area of Gaza, where they would then have the option to voluntarily leave. There's nothing voluntary about any of this situation. When people are starving, when people are constantly being killed, when people are basically being offered the choice between death, a concentration camp, these are not real choices. This is not, there's no voluntary situation here. There's nothing humanitarian about it. The world needs to see this, needs to be outraged. We need to break the silence, but we need to do it now.
Yeah, well, no, I think that's a very good point. And of course, we've seen here in the United States over the past several days, thousands of people take to the streets all around the country demanding stop starving Gaza. And those efforts are continuing and ongoing here in the United States and around the world. And I guess I want to ask you about the significance of that in some ways, because of course, I think all of us who see this just unbelievable moral catastrophe would like to see entities, governments act, 100 days ago, 9 months ago, and not be doing it. But it does seem that for people to continue to advocate is important because we, again, obviously they should be doing more. Obviously they should have done it sooner. But now you have Starmer saying he's going to be meeting with Germany and others around the Gaza situation. You had David Lammy, speaking out in the House of Commons, and then an MP saying you actually are complicit in war crimes yourself, which is certainly true. But the point being, it's obviously affecting them. And people who have no desire to do anything other than support the genocide, which they've been doing for 9 months, are now starting to feel like they are under the gun, and that the political consequences and the political crisis is such that it could really cause problems for them. And that seems important for people who are feeling discouraged, and understandably so, that so many people have been fighting so hard, and there's still so much intransigence from so many of these governments around actually doing anything to stop the genocide.
Yeah, it's a totally understandable feeling to have. I mean, it's hard for anyone to talk about the conditions in Gaza. I was just actually talking to others earlier before getting on the show. How can we talk about the starvation there? How can we talk about the genocide? It seems it's unspeakable. The crimes against the Palestinian people are unspeakable, and people have been out in the streets fighting, struggling, raising their voices constantly since this genocide began, and from even before. But I do think that it's important to make a distinction here. The fact that the genocide is intensifying is not a reflection on the failure of the movement. It is a reflection on the illegitimacy of the government to represent the views and the demands of its own people. And I don't just even mean the United States government, because people are rising up around the world. Now, people have been having mass protests in France. I'm sure that contributed to Macron's calculation about whether or not he wants to recognize the right of the Palestinian people to have a state. But if he didn't feel that pressure, would he really have done that? I don't think so. The point here is not that that there's nothing that we can do. The point is that the government itself, the United States government, does not represent the interests of its own population, let alone the people of the world. If that was the case, then it would have been a year and a half ago that Biden, after over 500,000 people showed up at the White House doorstep on November 4, 2023, completely unprecedented, he would have then, as the elected representative of the United States population, he should have picked up the phone, called the Pentagon, and ended the genocide, which he could do. Trump can also do the same thing. With one phone call, the United States can pull its support for Israel, and that would end things immediately. Israel cannot do this without the United States. But my point is, I'm repeating myself often because I think this is really important. The point is that government itself is not acting as a representative of the population, not on Palestine, and not on a whole wide variety of issues, if not all issues. And I think that's what we have to take away from this. And that means that it helps absolutely no one to stay home. We have to continue advocating, continue standing up, continue raising our voices, because even if the government is not acting in our interest, is not going to respond to our pleas, that does not mean that what we're doing doesn't have an impact. We are creating pressure, we are putting public pressure, we are sending a message to Gaza. We are also making sure that this chapter in history does not go down as something that was okay. We have to make sure that the precedent here is not set. And we also have to put pressure because we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make it the calculation of those in power. They have to consider the consequences in public opinion, in their own support. They have to consider the consequences. The people are not going to take this silently. They're not going to accept this reality. There's an International Day of Action planned for tomorrow, Friday, July 25. People will be protesting in cities and towns across the United States, across the world, calling for an end to the starvation regime, for the entry of aid. We have to all participate in this. I hope everyone can participate in some way, whether it's by making a phone call to your representative or coming to the protest or talking to some of your coworkers about what's going on. The media is not telling us the story, trying to relieve some of that pressure for those in power. We are the ones telling the story. We are the ones who must be the conscience of the people of the world. And I think that we're up for the task.
Well, Layan, as always, we appreciate it. You are the education director at the People's Forum and an editor at 1804 Books. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me. See you all in the streets tomorrow.
Well, we are going to go ahead and turn to another major geopolitical hotspot, and that is Ukraine, where there is many things happening, some of which are making the news, some of which are not. And we are very, very honored to be joined here as we continue the show once again by Glenn Deason, who is a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway and the author of The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order. As always, Glenn, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, I want to start here with the sort of outbreak. We've seen protest here around the change to the anti-corruption bureau, as it were, in Ukraine, some level of disquiet in the Western media and Western governments, it seems, with Zelensky for this move and maybe some other things. I mean, do you think that there's any real, possibility of a shift away from Zelensky as president? I mean, I know he canceled the election, so I don't know exactly how that would play out. And if so, what kind of impact do you see that having on the peace process?
Well, probably a positive impact on the peace process. I do think that Zelensky is not really offering what it's required to achieve a peace. He's more or less feeding the idea that what is required is this unconditional ceasefire. In other words, just freeze the war or all the front lines where they are. But nothing has really been resolved because the Russians, of course, invaded 3 years ago because they argued that NATO can't be permitted to entrench itself in Ukraine. So they want, first of all, neutrality for Ukraine. So I think this is the most important thing, that the Russians do not see it possible to reach any peace under Zelensky. Now, regarding there's also some indications, though, that the United States might also feel the same way, because if the US wants to end the war, they might also have reached a conclusion that it's not possible to do under Zelensky. Seymour Hersh published an article lately where he reported that according to some of his what's the word I'm looking for, sources. That the United States was thinking of replacing Zelensky as well. That is, they would like Zelensky to leave and ideally replace him with Zaluzhny. So I think this is, so this could be in the works. Now, I think the story, though, about how Zelensky is undermining democracy is not, it's not completely fair. I mean, he's no friend of democracy in Ukraine, but the so-called anti-corruption bodies, the independent ones that he would like to reduce the control of, they very much outsource a lot of the sovereignty to Western powers. Now, I think many Ukrainians see this as a problem, that too much of the control over Ukraine is now in the hands of Western powers, and primarily the United States. So I don't think it's all black and white. Even Ukrainians who have been very critical of the government, who are now also supporting this move because they see this as a form of foreign control over Ukraine. It's foreign presidential candidate Yulia Tymoshenko. She made a point that these were quasi-colonial structures in which sovereignty had been handed over to the United States. So this is a tendency often to, you have Western governments funding these NGOs, which are then taking responsibility for how to govern a country, and this is essentially what they want to have removed. So it's a very complicated topic, but what is interesting, though, is for the first time you see the Western media really going after Zelensky, which is interesting because the Russians would like to see him go as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in that vein, I mean, I wonder how you're interpreting the new EU package of sanctions. And I mean, we've talked about this on this show before. Trump's, he's always got some number of days, but the 50 days we're going to bring in the, even the worst sanctions you've ever seen. I mean, does this feel like, it's realistically trying to do anything to help Ukraine win the war? Or is it kind of maybe last second pressure, if you will, on Russia to make them a little more pliable to negotiate because the EU and the US would like to see it maybe come to a close?
Well, again, the question is why 50 days? Why, why so long? So, well, one of the explanations could be that this is to put more pressure on Russia ahead of negotiations. But if the negotiation over peace is an unconditional ceasefire, then it seems kind of pointless because from the Russian perspective, they went in again 3 years ago. They suffered greatly. And now they're at the cusp of victory, and they're going to suddenly freeze the front lines, and possibly Ukraine would become a de facto NATO member, or at least pulled into the NATO orbit. So they're not going to do this. And from their perspective, it's the whole negotiation power. The reason why the Ukrainians and the Europeans will be willing to accept neutrality for Ukraine is exactly because Russia is making huge advances in Ukraine. The attrition ratio is very much in Russia's favor and only keeps getting more and more in Russian favors as well. So without the continuation of the conflict, there will be no pressure on the NATO to accept any painful concessions. And painful concessions is what the Russians ask for. They want an end to NATO expansion and also acceptance that some of the territories, have been lost.
It's a good point, and I think it's an important point about how many people in the West understand how this conflict even evolved, because the West has asked Russia for many painful concessions since the fall of the Soviet Union, around NATO being pushed right up against it. And I feel there's still so much of a discourse that acts like Russia just sort of randomly invaded Ukraine, as opposed to this long period of time where they were essentially being pushed and pushed and pushed to accept something that is, whether people like it or whether they don't like it, obviously core to the identity of the role Russia would like to play both in Europe and in the world more broadly.
Yeah, well, this is really at the heart of the problem, because after the Cold War, initially we had agreements with the Russians to create an inclusive European security architecture where all European countries were part of it, and security would not be one enhancing security at the expense of others, but having indivisible security. But then, to pursue hegemonic peace, we did abandon this, and we created a Europe where Russia shouldn't have a voice, a seat at the table. So the main institutions of Europe should be NATO and the EU, which should include all countries except for Russia, the country now in Europe with the largest territory, the largest population, the largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, and also the largest army. So the idea that if we just cut them out of all institutions, they have no voice anymore, then they would go away. No, the only thing that happened was it only left Russia with the military to assert itself. So it doesn't really make any sense. So I think the main thing we should do is have some self-criticism and be able to, in order to actually find solutions to the conflict that has transpired, because one can criticize Russia's invasion of Ukraine, certainly, but to also then dismiss any legitimate security concerns it has, I think that's very self-destructive. Because again, if you can't diagnose the problem, we can't really solve it. Instead, there's been this almost, let's say, forced compliance around this narrative that Russia just had this unprovoked invasion. It wanted some new territories. The problem is there's no evidence for this. On the contrary, all evidence suggests that the territorial dispute is a consequence of the broken European security architecture. So, but again, this is the mood in Europe now is very aggressive, very hostile. So the ability to recognize the security concerns of our opponents is not really present at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And the political mood becoming so hostile, and it's really spilling over to the rest of the world. Of course, we saw with the new EU sanctions package targeting India, Indian companies, some of which are involved with Russia, but others who are not, the flag fleet. And obviously India issuing a statement that they were very unhappy about this. And it really just seems that, of course, some would argue these double standards go way back, but it really is almost forcing a consolidation of countries in Eurasia and Africa and other places that ultimately, if you want to have even the slightest bit of sovereignty, you have to reduce your exposure to America and Europe to be able to protect yourself, because no matter what, if you take the opposite position, no matter how much they court you, no matter how much Ursula von der Leyen is flying and saying we want to work with India and have trade, they're going to try to kneecap your economy.
And this is exactly the thing. And this is why different countries have different reasons why they won't follow this, which is why I don't think the sanctions are going to, I don't even think they're going to be imposed. I think it's just a threat. And even if they would be imposed, I don't, the 100% tariff by America, that is, I don't think they would be very effective, because for the Chinese, if they see this as being a way of splitting China from Russia, there's been a lot of American leaders making the point that after Russia's been broken, we can focus on China. They're the real enemy. So why would China go about undermining its main key strategic partner when they know that they're next on the chopping board? And even countries like India, which are very friendly with the United States, they don't want to have America's permission to trade with Russia or China or anyone else. So at the moment, all the major powers are scrambling for alternatives. That's alternative institutions, technologies, industries, transportation corridors, banks, payment systems, currencies. This is what's happening. This is why BRICS is so attractive as well. They're trying to create greater economic connectivity in a trade in a post-American world where they don't have to depend so much on the US. And this is the problem of very strong and prolonged sanctions. Is the rest of the country, rest of the world will eventually learn to live without. And same goes with the threat of sending weapons, more weapons now to Ukraine. The United States doesn't have that many missile defense, air defense systems to sell to the Europeans. The Europeans don't really have the money, and Ukrainians have been very exhausted and don't really have the manpower to man any of the weapons that are being sent either. So it is a very difficult situation, and it does seem as if this is simply a need to do something, but it's not going to be able to turn the tide. Things are unraveling very quickly now. And if we cared about the future of Ukraine, we would then begin to actually address the security concerns of our opponent. Because every time we talk about possible peace, it's only what does Ukraine want? What does Ukraine demand? When Russia is winning the war, it's time to actually address what are their security concerns. This has been largely criminalized now in Europe. That is, if you point out that they do demand an end to NATO expansion, then more or less you're a Russian puppet. So you're a Putinist, you're spreading Russian propaganda. So everyone has to conform to this narrative. It was unprovoked. And the problem here is, if it was unprovoked, then there's no real solutions, because the only thing Russia wants then is territory. So I think this lie is what is it will be a massive disaster for Ukraine. Because if there is no peace agreement, Russia will just make sure that the territory there can't be used by NATO against it in the future. So they will annex many more regions, and they will destroy the infrastructure in whatever remains of a rump state Ukraine.
Well, a lot to keep watching and a lot to keep following on this issue, and many things happening. And as always, Glenn Deason, we really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Oh, it's my great pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that will bring us to the end of our show today. If you tuned in some way halfway through, nothing bad has happened to Rania Khalek. She is out this week, but nonetheless will be back with us very soon. So you just had to deal with me today. But before we go, I did want to remind people that Rania recently was able to produce and put out a very important documentary as it concerns the pager attacks in Lebanon. And I think hopefully many of our viewers have already viewed it, seen it, shared it. But we wanted to share the trailer, if we could, here for that piece again, for those who are not aware, so that you can get on top of it.
تعرفت على رفيقي حسين ضهينة عن طريق الفيسبوك وبعد الإصابة رجعنا أخذنا رقمهم وبلشنا نحكيهم. وقتها كانوا بإيران، كان بعدلهم الوقت لينزلوا. أول يوم بينزلوا فيه رحنا لعنده. أنا بدي أتعلم، أنا بس بدي أتعلم وأكبر، أشتغل وواجه العدو الإسرائيلي.
We're leaving Barish, a village in South Lebanon. We were just visiting Ali, one of the victims of the pager attacks, and we're on our way to Dibba, another village, to visit Hussein, who's also a victim. He's 12 years old, of the pager attacks. These kids, their lives have been completely upended. Lots of facial disfiguration. They've lost fingers. Many of them can't see. So yeah, it's quite heavy stuff.
مرحبا، كيفك رانيا؟ مرحبا، كيفك؟
اسمي حسين محمد هيني، عمري 12. لما فقت أنا بالمستشفى كانوا أخواتي وبابا وماما حدي، قلت لهم الحمد لله طلعت فيني، ما طلعت بحدا.
Israel's pager attack was practically celebrated across the West. The media called it sophisticated. American officials hailed it as precise and targeted.
Wolf, indeed, the Mossad has a long, fascinating history of using methods like this, the latest in a long line of audacious, lethal, sometimes high-tech operations by the legendary Israeli intelligence agency Mossad.
The Israelis are the best.
Today they look like James Bond, carrying out an attack in Lebanon.
Targeting and eliminating membership and leadership of Hezbollah, I absolutely support that. In fact, if anything, I love it.
Israeli leaders and their supporters take pride in the attack and have often turned it into a joke, handing out pager trophies to political allies and threatening to use pagers against their adversaries while mocking victims as their bodies undergo surgery after surgery.
I'm a supporter of the Palestinians. I'm used to it.
Yeah, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. The thing is that
you just say I should die.
Beep, beep.
Former Israeli Prime Minister.
Well, that was just a taste there. So ultimately, you're going to have to go to YouTube and watch the whole thing. And I highly suggest that you do go to YouTube and watch the whole thing there. Fantastic documentary, fantastic work. Big shout out to Rania and also our partners at Blue House Films that helped put that together. And critically important stories for those who were injured in that attack and some of the broader context of what it means and how it took place. So please, please do check that out. Well, that is going to bring us to the end here today for the Freedom Side. Of course, a reminder to go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. Become a patron, become a member. Help us keep going and growing by your donations. We are viewer powered, as it were, and we really need you to help us continue to bring these stories and break through, if you will, the various spin and lies coming from many of the mainstream outlets around the world on critically important issues. Because if you're not well informed, you are not able to act in an informed manner that can actually change things. And I think that's the most important fact about gaining information. So that'll do it for us here today. For myself, for Rania, who's not here, but still for her, and the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.